Good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. Primus Books is delighted to welcome you all to the launch of our new title, Delhi and its Environs Before 1857, the account of Ramji Das, Sarishtadar, translated and annotated by Professor Shama Mitra Chenoy. The volume provides a rare description of the city, the Alam mein Intikab, where even Lord Indra chose to alight, and this work commands a distinctive place amongst the Persian and Urdu works recorded between the mid-18th and early 20th centuries. Ramji Das's Zikr-e-Umurat-e-Am Zila-e Delhi, an account of Delhi and its surroundings, is as unique as the city in which it was written. Just before the momentous events of 1857, which completely changed this space. Ramji Das was a newly retired deputy Sarishtadar, a great admirer of Syed Ahmad Khan and his work, who engaged in a dialogue with the past through the material edifices of Delhi and its neighborhood. In other words, Ramji Das could not just adhere to the prevalent 19th century acumen by carrying out a survey of structures, but went beyond this to discuss popular cultures, the administrative divisions, and the revenue jurisdiction of Delhi. His account included a knowledgeable studies of water bodies and dams that also defined the undulating topography of the city's geographical regions, the fiscal tight-fistedness of the Department of the Collectorate, headed by English officials, and made a note of some unregistered places of interest. In this annotated translation of the text, Shama Mitra Chenoy brings forth a work about the way Delhi once was. I would now like to invite Dr. Prasun Chatterjee to address the audience before we move on.
On behalf of Primus Books, I welcome you all in the audience to the book launch and discussion this evening. It is an honor to have such a panel of eminent historians with us today, and I would like to welcome Professor Amar Farooqui, Professor Farhat Nasreen, and Dr. Jyoti Mohan to this occasion. It has been wonderful to know Shama and her research over the years regarding the accounts of Delhi. Rarely do we come across a historian who is so meticulous with her translation, annotations, and overall vision of a project. For her last book on Sayrul Manazil, I had seen Shama patiently working with the editor to bring to the readers a complex work of translation of the 5 manuscripts of the account. Now here, the account of Ramji Das Sarishtadar also gave us equal joy at Primus to be associated with the work. Not only due to the speciality of this account for being the only extant account of the outlying regions of Delhi, but also for being a larger vision of Shama's overall project of bringing all the accounts of Delhi just before 1857 to all of us readers. At Primus Books, while editing the work, we have often wondered at the hidden structures around us and their histories, which this book unravels. I hope our august audience today will enjoy the discussion that unfolds following the book launch. We look forward to this evening of discussion about heritage and history. Over to you, Amrupali.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, for the introduction. Before we move on to the main event, in anticipation of a truly interdisciplinary discussion, please allow me to introduce this evening's discussants, beginning with our author. Shama Mitra Chenoy, formerly Professor of History at Shivaji College, University of Delhi. Her area of research is medieval Delhi from 17th to mid-19th century. She has authored, translated, and edited several works in this field. Her research into pre-1857 rebellion records has provided us with a better understanding of the history of Delhi and its surrounding areas. Some of her notable publications include Delhi in Transition and Beyond Mirza Sangin Beg's Sair-ul-Manazil, Shah Jahanabad, a city of Delhi, 1638 to 1857, and Murakka-e-Dehli, the Mughal capital in the time of Muhammad Shah. We also have two eminent discussants with us this evening. Our first speaker, Professor Amar Farooqui, formerly taught at the Department of History, University of Delhi. He specializes in the history of modern India. Some of his publications include Zafar and the Raj, Anglo-Mughal Delhi, circa 1800 to 1857, and Sindhyas and the Raj, Princely Gwalior, circa 1800 to 1850. Colonial Delhi, before and after 1857, has been of special interest to him. Our next speaker, Professor Farhat Nasreen, is currently the head at Department of History and Culture, Jamia Millia Islamia. She is interested in Delhi's history as well as topics pertaining to medieval Indian history and has authored multiple books in the discipline. Her current research involves using history as a life coach to maintain harmony and balance in both the individual and societal spheres. She also engages with the emotional aspect of historical figures and events that support the development of a conversation between oneself and others by putting happiness in the perspective of history. Her most recent publications include The Great Mughals and If History Has Taught Us Anything. And Dr. Jyoti Mohan, I don't think unfortunately, she's not been able to join, but I'd still like to introduce her. Our next speaker, Dr. Jyoti Mohan, is a historian of colonial South Asia and of Asian America. She's taught us at the University of Maryland, College Park, and was formerly lecturer of history at the Morgan State University, Baltimore. Her research aims to decentralize the British gaze on India by attributing different portrayals of the country as exotic, religious, philosophical, despotic, impoverished, and so forth to the particular people and countries that produced them, rejecting the notion that there was a universally accepted European conception of India in the process. She's currently completing a manuscript about the presentation of India at world fairs and exhibitions in France, Britain, and the United States during the colonial period. Her research interests also include colonialism, post-colonialism, subaltern studies, intellectual history, race, diasporic developments, the South Asian diaspora, and Asian American history. Her recent publication includes Changing India, French Scholars, and the Preoccupation with India in the 19th Century. So, after our esteemed speakers have all said a few words, we'll have a small question and answer session with the panelists. So if anyone has any question for Professor Chenoy or the discussants, please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A box below. I would now like to invite Professor Chenoy, Professor Farooqui, Professor Nasreen, and Dr. Mohan to release the volume and hold it up for the audience. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. I would now like to invite Professor Chenoy to tell us something about the volume and also about her experience of translating the book.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I feel honored and grateful to Professor Farooqui, Professor Nasreen, and Dr. Mohan for agreeing to share their comments about the book. I also feel privileged that Mr. V.N. Verma and Dr. Prasoon Chatterjee of Primus have organized the book launch, and I thank everyone who worked towards this, Amrapali, Abhijit, Shama Mitra, and others. I am beholden to all the people who have joined it. Because of the time factor, I wrote down everything so that I do not take more time. Kudos to Ramji Das for penning Zikre Umurat-e Aam Zilai Delhi. and to Professor Mohyuddin Akil for discovering, editing, and publishing the manuscript in Urdu as Tarikh-o Asar-e Delhi. This was an enticement that led to Delhi and its environs before 1857, the account of Ramji Das Sarishtadar. While the Mughal Badshah sat on his throne in the Diwan-e-Khas of Qila-e-Mualla, it was the English East India Company's government that controlled and administered the city and its environs from 1803 onwards. From the end of the 18th century, company officials promoted studies classified under the genre of colonial knowledge production. Their ecumenical model included categorization, periodization, stylization, documentation, and cataloging of structures across different regions. The reason? Perhaps to gather information, understand, act as subsequent patrons, or to be recorded in a definitive and a positive manner. Between 1821 to 1854, 3 works were written about Delhi, adhering partly to the above pattern, most evident in the titles of these works. It is difficult to speak of one without introducing the other 2. This will also help us discern if the authors copied from one another or not. Mirza Sangeen Beg was commissioned to write about Delhi by William Fraser, and he presented the latter with Serul Manazil in 1821. Sayyid Ahmad Khan understood there was a market for works focused on structures. Of his own volition, he put together a work called Asarus Sanadid in 1847 and an edited version in 1854. Ramji Das came up with Zikre Umurat-e-Aam Zilai Dehli in 1854, immediately after he superannuated from his position as Deputy Sarishtadar or record keeper from the office of the Commissioner of Delhi, Colonel George William Hamilton. According to Ramji Das, he wrote Zikr at Hamilton's suggestion. So we have 3 words: commissioned, own volition, and suggestion. Some commonalities in these works are: 1, they are all about Delhi. 2, in one way or another, the company officials were involved. 3, they are anecdotal. 4, all have left out large areas of Delhi. And lastly, the titles of these manuscripts belie the material that lies between the pages. When modern scholars term these writings as works on monuments of Delhi, I presume they do so without turning the pages. Thus, while the subject matter was Delhi, the size and nature of the works differed substantially. Sair is a large canvas, Asar a gigantic mural, and Zikr a miniature. I felt compelled to translate Zikr because it is imperative to give some agency to the individual authors, as these works reflect their knowledge, capacity to understand, research, and express. Hanuman brought the entire mountain because he couldn't locate the life-giving plant. And Mirza Sangeen Beg, unable to comprehend what was expected of him, wrote of people, professions, commercial and residential spaces, cultures, structures, graves, anecdotes, and inscriptions in Sair. It has 24 paintings out of sync with the text, as these are sans human representation. Asar was a documentation and a halfway architectural treatise on edifices, about bazaars, cultures, important personages of the city, and inscriptions. In addition to these, it had over 5 score sketches of structures. Sayyid Ahmad Khan's understanding of the model was superior, but incomplete because he was neither an engineer nor an architect. Ramji Das himself stated his designation in the official machinery. Hence, a zikr is a very methodical, typological documentation of structures and movements of people, a fine example of a work carried out by a meticulous Sarishtadar and observer, more at ease with administrative and cultural distinctions instead of architectural vocabulary. Zikr reflects a holistic understanding of the topography of the geographical region of Delhi, the hills, the salt waste, the flow of perennial and monsoon rivers, the inundation, the runnels, areas with good clean water, and vice versa. Zikr is a manual which informs and explains administrative divisions and terminology, colloquial and generic terms like Hazar Sutun Mahal and Varadari. Ramji Das focused equally on the structures and aspects of life in the Parganas and Havelis of Delhi as on the Sheher and past habitations. We get an inkling from Ser that the British were in Delhi to stay, but Zikr impresses and defines the fact that the company officials were completely in charge of the administration of the city, the suburbs, and the vast rural areas. In 1823, the company officials truncated the revenue districts of Delhi from 71 to 28, changed the endowment policy for religious places from quit rent of earmarked villages to fixed annual stipends, repaired earlier important structures, provided or revived water bodies, constructed bridges over runnels, decided issues of tax relief to farmers, and even identified areas for themselves for taking air and for recuperation. Ramji Das is the only writer to balance the Hijri, the Gregorian, the Bikram Sambat, and the Fasli calendars, include information on structures like Firoz Shah Tughlaq's Ban or Sarai Ruhela, the confluence of the Sahibi River and the Faiz Nehar causing many whirlpools, the Rajput Nigahi's palace, the missing inscription of the strong Narayana fort, Siddi's Bagh acquired by Manuel Sahab, who made interesting additions to it and then sold it off, the engagements and infrastructural issues at Sabzwari's Dargah, Sarai's temples, the halo around self-immolation and the Kavar tradition, etc. The alternate usage of certain structures in the mid-19th century, and alluded to the migration of the Punjabis into the city. Delhi had been the capital city across centuries in the medieval period, and a comprehensive biography eluded it because it was impossible to encapsulate its extent and complexity in a single work. Every dimension is important to understand the city. Till the 18th century, it had been defined by writings centered around climate, royal structures, festivals, bazaars, agrarian production, cultural efflorescence, particularly in religio-urban spaces, tables of dynastic histories, and the socio-moral decline of the city. Ramji Das admired Sayyid Ahmad Khan and lauded him for writing the history of Delhi in Urdu. If history is a dialogue between the past and the present, then Ramji Das used structures to make both an intervention into history and to write the history of Delhi, as well as some journalistic inroads, all in Urdu. His sources were his professional knowledge, personal experiences, and textual material. Through Colonel Hamilton's descendants, we come to know that Ramji Das's zikr reached abroad, for they sold his collection of 1,000 manuscripts to the British Museum and to the John Rylands Library in Manchester. How and in what circumstances Colonel Hamilton acquired the manuscript and whether he established his proprietary right over it or just carried it with him to England is something we will never know. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy, for taking us through the book. I would now like to invite Professor Amar Farooqui to share his observations on the book.
Thank you.
Yes.
So let me first, I would like to first congratulate Professor Shama Mitra Chenoy for the publication of this book. And in a sense, this sort of completes the trilogy which she has published, beginning with Muraqqa Dehli, which is a early 18th century text, and then Mirza Sangin Beg's the very definitive edition of Mirza Sangin Beg's work, which she has collated the several manuscripts and provided with us with an authoritative translation of that text. And now this very obscure writer, very obscure text. Of course, Mirza Sangin Beg is also a very obscure writer. We really know nothing about him. Perhaps we know a little more about Ramji Das. So we now have these three texts, and I think along with Asaru Sanadid, which Shama had mentioned, we can speak of these texts which tell us about this sort of long period of transition from the late Mughal period to the eve of the 1857 revolt. This particular text is a very interesting text because the brevity of this text is the outcome of the precision with which a revenue official writes. So as Shama was pointing out, that this is a revenue official who knows the revenue records very well. He has been in the revenue establishment for a long time. Hamilton himself was a senior revenue person in the colonial revenue official. So this is somebody who knows how to provide a great deal of detail with a great deal of precision. So that's why there is this brevity. It's a very small text actually, but it packs in a great deal of information. And Shama has already highlighted some of the aspects of Delhi which Ramji Das talks about. I'll just sort of mention quickly one or two things which I thought are significant. First of all, just Mirza Sangin Beg's Sairul Manazil is about the Delhi of Akbar Shah. Akbar Shah had, of course, a long reign from 1806 to 1837. So it's a text, despite its several sort of, perhaps Shama has argued in that in her introduction to that to the translation to Sairul Manazil, that it actually was a text long in the making. So perhaps there were portions which were written as late as the early 1850s, but there are those which date back to the 1820s. But nevertheless, the bulk of the text is really the Delhi of Akbar Shah. Ramji Das's text about Delhi is about the Delhi of Bahadur Shah. So Bahadur Shah of the early 1850s, about which we do have considerable information, that's the Delhi that is reflected over here. And Ramji Das, since he's a revenue official, when he's writing about this, about Delhi, he's accustomed to thinking in terms of revenue units. So you frequently see the reference to the Zilla, the Pargana. In fact, the title itself is about the Delhi Zilla. So he's not writing about Delhi, he's writing about the larger revenue unit called Delhi. Of course, as Shama pointed out, that in the 1820s, there was there was several changes in the revenue administration and the way these revenue units were organized. But it's very obvious the way the terminology, the revenue terminology, keeps on recurring throughout the text. So, which is not surprising given the fact that this is a sort of very experienced revenue official who's writing about Delhi. What is perhaps what makes this text very different, again, as Shama pointed out, is that a great deal of attention is paid to rural Delhi. So the environs of Delhi, and that's also there in the title, and when we say environs, it's really about rural Delhi. So a great deal of attention is paid in this text to rural Delhi, and Delhi has continues to have a very, very large rural belt. And this is something that we often tend to overlook when we talk about Delhi as an urban center. We tend to overlook the fact that many of us reside actually amidst villages. So I stay at a place called Patparganj, which is the famous sort of Patparganj village. So Delhi is sort of interspersed with so many villages. And I think, that sense actually comes out very conspicuously in this, in Ramji Das's text. For instance, he tells us a lot about the, just to give you one example, about the village of Palam. And of course, Palam, we grew up, referring to the international airport always as the Palam airport, the main airport. But now, of course, it has a different name. But Palam, in my childhood, always signified the airport. But that it is a village is something we tend to overlook. And the text Ramji Das tells us that this was actually a very, very old habitation. So similarly, there are sort of details that are provided about rural settlements around in and around Delhi. There is also a lot of attention is paid to the sarais. So in talking about the outskirts of Delhi, by the way, even Mirza Sangin Beg has a section on the outskirts of Delhi, and in fact, he tells us about places like Panipat also. But he doesn't pay attention really. He's somebody who, a city dweller. So he might know the structures that are located in rural Delhi. He doesn't know about those villages. He doesn't know about the rural settlements. On the other hand, Ramji Das really knows rural Delhi very well. So he perhaps might have resided, of course, in one of these rural settlements. But the sarais mark the outskirts, as it were, of the city. Yusuf Sarai often is referred to as the boundary of Delhi. And I again recall that till almost, I think, the late 60s, early 70s, expansion in that area. Yusuf Sarai was always considered to be sort of the boundary, in the sense that you won't really go after after dark beyond Yusuf Sarai. So, you get a sense of, how people in Delhi in the early 19th century would have thought of this geographical space called Delhi. And the sarais are important markers of that boundary of that geographical space, the urban space called Delhi. There are also references in this. So you can see this is a city that is being transformed also. And just one example, I think, which I would like to mention is that of the jail. So there is a reference over here. It's a very brief reference. Most of the references actually are very brief. that there is the jail, which is built outside the Delhi gate, this used to be a sarai, so the British built this new jail, and there is a reference to some buildings which were meant to be for medical purposes, so kind of hospital, and perhaps what Ramji Das, though this is not stated in the text, what he's really referring to is the new lunatic asylum which came up in Delhi alongside the jail. There is, I would just like to sort of make a reference over here to how this lunatic asylum figures in the 1857 documents relating to Delhi, the mutiny papers, where there are 2 or 3 very significant documents which refer to this lunatic asylum. The cooks have run away, and those who are in charge of running the asylum, and this is while the rebels are in charge of the city, so they're writing to the police daroga that could you please send some cooks, because otherwise the inmates of the asylum are going to create a big problem. So which in fact points to the fact that even in something like the lunatic asylum was in a functional state while the rebels were in charge of the city. So there's this reference to this new institution which is close to the Delhi state, Delhi jail, although it doesn't really refer to a lunatic asylum, but one would assume that what Ramji Das is referring to is the lunatic asylum. While concluding, I would just like to mention that this book, perhaps the text needs to be approached not just, in terms of an understanding of the heritage or the structures of Delhi, but it's a very important source for the revenue history of Delhi. So I think, this is a dimension which Ramji Das's work really adds to the other works which we have just been talking about. And once again, I would like to thank Shama. I would like to thank Primus for undertaking this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Farooqui. Thank you for your very insightful and detailed observation on the book. That was very enriching for all of us. I would now like to invite Dr. Nasreen to say a few words on the book.
Hi, everyone. I'm extremely grateful to the author and the publishers for giving me an opportunity to share some thoughts on this book. So we've already spoken pretty much about what Ramji Das did and what he wrote. I'll come to that a little later. Let me first talk about how Shama and the publishers, how have they packaged the account of Ramji Das for us. And one of the most remarkable things and one of the most fantastic things that I notice about this book is the subheadings, the absolutely fantastic subheadings. Each of them has got a very interesting title. I'll just give you an example. There's this, she's talking about the 17th century when Shama writes in the introduction. So she says 17th century, Alam mein intikhab. Then she writes early 18th century, Ajab ye daur. Then she writes about late 18th century and writes Ujra Dayar. So she keeps giving you a sense of what is going on, the larger picture. So if you would say that the text of Ramji Das gives us a backdrop of the times that we are living in, then Shama builds up a backdrop to what Ramji Das is going to tell us. So she builds a backdrop. So say, for example, when she writes Ujra Dayar, she just gives a line about, Mir and Sauda. She just writes, passingly that Mir and Sauda the. But the way it is written, it'll immediately take you back to Mir and Sauda if you are reading it carefully. So when I was reading it, I thought of, how the times are changing, and this title is Ujra Dayar, and Mir goes on to write ki bhigi palke kisi ki pochte gar aasti rakhte hui sharmindagi kya kya hame is daste khali se. There's no money. I can't do anything for anyone. My hands are absolutely empty. So the introduction itself takes you places. Then she writes early 19th century, and then the little title that she gives is Khun ke Aansu. right? Then she talks about that there are twin centers of power in Delhi that gradually emerge. So you will have the Badshah, the so-called Badshah, and then you have the British government. And then for a moment you think that Delhi has been a place where there have often been two sets of governments which have been running side by side. If you think of the rise of the Khiljis and you look at the period just before that, so there was already the family of Balban which was there, but the Khiljis were in Baharpur and they were getting more and more powerful. Then she comes on to the mid-19th century and she writes Cold Embers, the Cold Embers. That's what she gives a subtitle. And when you think of that, it took me to Mirza Ghalib, and who says ki who's written ki jala hai jism jahan dil bhi jal gaya hoga, kuredte ho jo ab raakh justuju kya hai. So I mean, the beauty of her writing and the sheer quality of the publication, because the font size is excellent, the page quality is excellent. Anyone who holds this book in their hands is going to love it. That's my promise. So now I come to the book itself. Now, there are very, very interesting things about the book, which Shama argues in favor of Ramji's writing, which is true. I mean, she says that he doesn't treat the structures as structures, but he's trying to connect them with people, and you really cannot have a history of structures without connecting them to the people who use them and how they felt about those structures. So that is very much there. The other thing is the capturing the history of the remote areas, which really were not in Delhi. And the other fine point, which she keeps coming back to, and Ramji Das also mentions it, but not very directly, is this, that after Nadir Shah's attack, the people who were in the suburban areas finally decided to move into the area of Shahjahanabad because they didn't feel secure enough in the suburbs. They felt that maybe the law and order situation is going to be far better in the urban area. So there is a shift. So when you look at the whole narrative and the way it's been presented, it's as if, Ramji Das is holding a camera where he takes a close-up shot, he takes a close shot, and he takes a distant shot. And that is exactly what Shama is also doing. She's also changing, the distance of the object and her camera. So which makes it so very interesting. Then, of course, Ramji Das talks about the superimpositions of new, superimpositions on the old buildings. So new kind of superimpositions, which is change in the use of the buildings. With Professor Farooqui just mentioned one of them, that how there was the sarai which was turned into a jail khana, and it is mentioned there. Then the other, there's a very beautiful passage which Shama has written, which I would just like to quickly cite here. She writes, the people lived through a large dose of nostalgia, a foggy sense of reality, amidst the existence of a dialectical relationship among the Badshah, the inhabitants of the city, and the company officials. There were those who understood that the British were here to stay, packed a lot of power as patrons, and were keen to understand the myriad cultures of the subcontinent. This is, this is absolutely fantastic. Then Shama gives numbers to everything. I mean, when she's talking about, when she begins with Ramji Das and his text, when she's introducing the text, she says, there are 4 facts about Ramji Das. She'll tell you immediately, isme 4 facts hain. Look at them, right? Then she goes on to say that, he has made 3 most important observations. So the moment your author puts a number to things, then you go back and you see, अच्छा वो कौन से 4 points हैं, अच्छा वो कौन से 3 सबसे important observations हैं, and then you track them through the book, right? So I think that is beautiful because that makes the reading so easy, so valuable, so understandable, absolutely fantastic. Then in some ways, I felt that the city has just not changed, because Ramji Das tells us that, that there were people who used to go to Safdarjung's tomb for a walk, and there were people who used to go to Mehrauli for a cool breeze. In that way, how has Delhi changed? It's still the same. I mean, sometimes I still just go and park my car in the parking of Safdarjung tomb, and I think that maybe I can just sit here for a while. It still is so calm. Then there is this thing about the traffic jams. You see, he says that around the dargahs on Thursdays when people congregate, there is a traffic jam. So lo and behold, we still have the traffic jams. So Delhi has changed, and in some ways it has not changed. So it was a lot of fun to, read this. Then he also notes the destruction. So he says that how the buildings were dismantled, the raw material were used by other rulers to construct their, cities, their forts, and so on. So we know some of them, but how this man puts it, he writes that stones from the tomb of Khane Khana were taken all the way to Lucknow. You see, so I mean that is all very interesting pieces of information. Then he writes about the anecdote about how the nobles of Firoz Shah Tughlaq were trying to make him feel better when he had lost his son, and how they made a hunting area and a hunting palace for him. So when you read that, you feel that he's not just telling you about the buildings, he's also telling you how people used to manage loss. How did they deal with sorrow? And that is not something that maybe even Ramji Das was thinking about, but he tells. So it's for you to, kind of take it from there. He's telling you, you have to take. Then he also talks about, the impact of political events on people, and there are a whole lot of them. Then he usually doesn't mention too many details about the events in the buildings, but he does mention about in reasonable detail. Given that it's a short account, there's a reasonable detail about how Humayun fell from the stairs of Sher Mandan. So there is, there's an important death, because that, that caused a lot of political turmoil. So if there is an important death related to a certain, building, then he bothers to mention about it. And when he mentions it, he also mentions that he was fond of books and there's a library, and then he fell. So that's very interesting, because usually the details are not, it's not so detailed. Another very interesting thing about the Arab Sarai. So when he writes about the Arab Sarai, he says that in this Sarai, there were around 300 Arabs, 100 Sayyids, 100 Sheikhs, and 100 others. So that means that the Sayyids and the Sheikhs were far more important in the intra-Muslim hierarchy, which is supposed to be actually non-existent, but it was existent, not only existent. I mean, and one thing, other interesting thing is that I'm wondering, how did the Sheikhs manage to reach up to the level of the Sayyids to secure 100 seats for themselves? So 100 Sheikhs, 100 Sayyids, and 100 others. This is a very, very important piece of information. Then, of course, the description is so dramatic. We felt like going back to the time when there was this in the month of Sawan Bhado, since we are having Sawan Bhado right now. So you have Mela Sere Gul Farosha, and then you have, these people making fans out of the flowers, and then people would gather and have a good time and be absolutely dramatic, fantastic. I've already spoken to you about Firoz Shah trying to handle the death of his son. Then, of course, the mention about Barapulla. My God, I go and stand in that jam almost every alternate day. And this man, this author of ours, Ramji Das, he writes, just see, what does he say? He says it's a very advantageous bridge and is worthy of being protected. Wow. You have lakhs of cars running on that bridge today, and you look at the vision of your author, Ramji Das. He's saying this is worth preserving. Bang on right, he was. Then, of course, he tells us about, the Sarai Julena. Then he talks about the Sarai Juliana, to be more specific. Then he talks about, this woman's husband was a doctor. So in a way, you get to know the position of the doctors, how if they manage to heal somebody, they would be, rewarded greatly, and so on and so forth. Then he talks about the monthly Marsi Akhwani in the Jorbagh, Karbala. That's also very interesting. And the grand celebration of Hazrat Ali's birthday every year in that particular Karbala. That's also very, very interesting. So basically, I mean, the story of Delhi is an unending story. And it goes to the credit of Professor Shama Chenoy Mitra to brought all of, various versions of this story together. And yet the story doesn't end. Because when you read this book, when you finish reading this book, you feel so enthused about knowing yet more, because there are so many things that you would like to explore. There's so many open questions that this man Ramji Das leaves, and you would think of looking into those. So Shama, in a way, has literally lit a Shama in the dark alleys and the bheed bhari sadkein, dhool, dhakkar and garmi. She's lit a Shama, and I really hope that she spreads light everywhere. And then I was thinking, क्योंकि इन्होंने क्षमा जलाई है तो बहुत सारे तरह तरह के ख्यालात आते हैं आदमी के दिल में, तो मैं सोच रही थी कि अगर इतनी सारे दिल्ली के इतिहास she has collected, and what if Delhi could write its own history? What if Delhi could write its own history? What would have it written? Like you have, those childhood questions that, एक शहर की जीवनी लिखो, write as if you are a city. What would Delhi write about itself? There was one, when I was, an overview of the whole account, it brought me to a ghazal, which was written by Bashar Nawaz in 1982 for a movie called Bazaar, which went like this, ki karoge yaad to har baat yaad aayegi. गुजरते वक्त की हर मौज ठहर जाएगी, गली के मोड़ पे सुना सा कोई दरवाजा, तरसती आंखों से रास्ता किसी का देखेगा, निगाह दूर तलक जाके लौट आई. And if दिल्ली तो इतनी बार बनी, इतनी बार उजड़ी, I was thinking if Delhi had to say something, maybe it would say, गालिब का शेर है कि कहूँ किससे मैं कि क्या है, शबे गम बुरी बला है, मुझे क्या बुरा था मरना अगर एक बार हो, ये ना थी हमारी किस्मत की विसाले याद. Absolutely beautiful. Loved the book. Many congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nasreen. Thank you for the close reading of the text and taking us through the book. That was very enriching for all of us. Thank you very much. And also for noticing the production details. We're very delighted. So now we open the floor for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please post them in the Q&A box below. We do have one question. This is from S.K. Aruni, and either Professor Chenoy or anyone of the panelists could please answer them. So they say, S.K. Aruni says, firstly, congratulate you. My inquiry is that are there similar attempts of writings before 1857 about Agra city?
I'm sorry, I really have no idea if there were any attempts about, writing about Agra city before 1857. There was one, yes, now I remember. I mentioned this in several manazil. Around 1810 or 15, there was one attempt to write about the structures around Sikandra and a few other structures. But what came of that manuscript, if it was written, I have no idea. But other than that, I have not heard of anything else.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chenoy. There is a message from Professor Kumkum Roy. She says, congratulations to Shama and the Panellists team and for a lively discussion. This is from Professor Kumkum Roy.
Thank you so much.
Kripali, I think we have one more question from Professor S.K. Aruni. Can you please look into that? Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is the Ramji Das text similar to the first decade survey of Buchanan's and Colin Mackenzie of southern India, including Mysore state?
I have not seen those surveys at all, so I will not be able to comment.
Okay.
Professor Farooqui may throw some light on it.
All that I can say is, all that I would like to say is that, the format is quite different for the McKinsey surveys. But I think, all these texts, whether it is Mirza Sangin Beg, whether it is Ramji Das, they serve a similar purpose. These are colonial officials are in the process of gathering a great deal of information about the the areas that they control. So so Delhi, this attempt to document Delhi in Mirza Sangin Beg and again in Ramji Das, I think it's part of a similar attempt. And I think this we also need to think about the kind of audience for which text like Ramji Das's work is written. I mean, people could have been sort of, the texts which could have been pointed out to colonial officials, because these are really texts meant for colonial officials. Could be, of course, Mirza Sangin Beg, or even Asarus Sanadin was available. So if they wanted to know about structures. And my own sort of impression is, and I don't know whether Professor Nasreen, who's read the text very closely, would, I don't know whether you would agree with this, that this is really a text that's written for relatively junior officials posted in Delhi who don't really know the city. So they might know about get to know about the structures from other texts. But if they really want to know rural Delhi, if they want to know about a little more about, sarais or about dargahs, what they need to be familiar with. I think, this is the kind of text which would have been recommended to them. So I would suppose that that's the kind of audience that this would be written for. But ultimately, all these texts, whether it's when they're documenting Mysore, it's also about collecting information about these territories that are to be ruled by the East India Company.
Thank you, Professor Farooqui, for answering that question. We have another question from Sonak Bhatt. Would you argue that because of being a revenue official, Ramji Das was ideally straddling the power circles and the laity equally, and was in a good position to tell the story of Delhi? Perhaps Professor Chenoy
Yes,
could.
absolutely. He was straddling, both these things, of course. Even for that matter, was Mirza Sangin Beg when he wrote Sairul Manazil, because he was already an officer and later he became head of the police. So these people, of course, straddle two different worlds to be able to they are in contact with the officials of the company, and on the other hand, they have so much knowledge about the city and they know the people. So that is why they are in a position to do these things. Otherwise, how will they? Otherwise, the colonial officers would have done this work themselves. Definitely, they are straddling two different worlds.
Thank you for answering that, Professor Chenoy. We again have a message from Dr. Snigdha Singh. She says, congratulations. Shama, looking forward to reading it. The discussion was interesting and loved the insights given by Farhat, Nasreen, especially the Shairi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, should I wind it up then? Okay, before we end this evening's program, we'd like to say that it's been wonderful to be a part of this event. On behalf of our organization, I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests, Professor Amar Farooqui, Professor Farhat Nasreen. Thank you very much, ma'am and sir. We are grateful to Professor Chenoy for giving us the opportunity to publish her book. Sincere thanks are also due to Mr. Sugat Jain, who's our managing director, Mr. B.N. Verma, Dr. Prasun Chatterjee, and the entire team of Primus for their cooperation. Finally, I'd also like to thank all of you present here for finding the time to be with us today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So then we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor
Bye-bye,
Chenoy, Professor
everyone.
Farooqui, Professor Nasreen, for being
Thank you.
with us. It was wonderful to have you here. We'll be in touch later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Okay. Once again, congratulations, Shama.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. The book is dedicated to Professor Farooqui.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So it's good to be here, and I can now see one or two more questions coming up curiously, but those can be perhaps answered offline then. Okay, bye then.
Oh.
Let's disconnect and thank you.